I was taken back to where my drug-induced death had happened and looked down on myself. I had to look down on my body and watch myself deteriorate. Everything looked and smelled like rotting flesh. I watched this happen until all that was left of me was a chunk of my tongue rotting. And that flesh is what I was to be for eternity. That Chinese torture thing, where they drip water on your forehead until there is a hole in your skull. That's what was going to happen to my tongue. I'll start this off with a little background information. My name is Kiki. I'm 24. I started doing drugs when I was 16, which for the first 2 years was just pot and ecstasy. Slowly but surely I advanced, and now have coke, speed, oxycontin, Valium, MDMA, ketamine, MDA, LSD, mushrooms, Zappa, and most recently, 2CB under my belt. The first hallucinogen that I ever tried was mushrooms, and I immediately fell in love. I love the giggles, laughing until I'm crying and my cheeks hurt, the vivid colours, the movement and the happy mindset. I stuck to mushrooms as my go-to hallucinogen until I went to a festival called Astral Harvest. 2 years ago, I was introduced to LSD. What I experienced, I could have never expected. After hearing about people being fried from it, I was really scared to ever try it. But on July 3rd, 2012, I decided to take the plunge, and acid became my new favourite hallucinogen. At the time of my 2CB trip, I had taken acid 4 or 5 times. Not one of those experiences could have even slightly prepared me for what was going to happen. On July 3rd, 2014, my friend Seaman and I headed an hour north of our hometown to attend our festival of the year, Astral Harvest. We got there, set up our tent and went on our way to find our friends that we were meeting there. It was 8 o'clock at this time, and dusk was setting in. We got halfway down the trail toward the main stage and found our friends, Esmeralda, Jay and Leah. Jay and Leah had already consumed some MDMA and mushrooms, so Esmeralda, Seaman and I started out on our search for something. We ended up taking some MDMA and a tab of acid each. Even though I had been looking forward to the festival and was happy about who I was with, I wasn't yet in party mode. The music was playing, and it sounded great, but nothing made me want to dance. I felt sluggish and somewhat uninterested. The acid had very little effect on me, no movement, no colours, and no real euphoria. I went to Seaman and told him that I needed something more to kick up what I had already taken. Maybe another hit of acid. Seaman is one of those people who just knows who to ask to get drugs at these festivals. I'm a little more shy. By this time, the acid had taken a slight effect and had for about an hour. When Seaman came back, I asked him what he had gotten a hold of. He said that he got more MDMA and a substance that I had never heard of called 2CB. He explained to me that it would definitely kick up my high and that it was a really strong drug and extremely dose sensitive. I said I don't care, I want some. He replied that I should wait another hour and if I still felt like I wanted to take it, then he would give it to me. So I agreed. I waited an hour and still hadn't gotten anything major from the acid, visually or mentally, so I told Seaman I was ready to take the 2CB. I was so excited to see what the difference was, so he pulled out the pressed pill, broke it in half and gave me half, while splitting the other half between himself and Esmeralda. At this time, we were at the main stage. We hung out there a little bit, and then all agreed that we should head over to our favourite stage, Waka Chan. On our way there, we stopped at a fire pit. At this point, I started to feel the effects. I became ecstatic, excited, giddy and silly. I had a fantastic body high. It felt almost as though I could feel the wind brushing against me, but it didn't feel like wind. It was more like a warm fur blanket brushing against my skin. And the visuals. Oh my god. I find with mushrooms and acid, I see many patterns all over everything. The sky and anything that's one tone. But with the 2CB, the effects were different. The skies sparkled, but there was an actual twinkle. They had increased in size and they were dancing around miraculously. My dosage of 2CB was a success. I felt so light and airy. I was walking around stumbling a little bit, not because I was that messed up, but because that's what I do when I do hallucinogens. So, we continued on our way to Waka Chan. The walk there was about 8 minutes. Then it went from cool to confusing. At Wakachan, there is a little tent area that they have with couches, rugs and pillows for people to sit, chill out and relax on. So, me and my little crew went over there to sit down and smoke a bowl of weed. Jay took the first hit. Leah took the second hit. I was third, and as I inhaled, Seaman startled me with, "You shouldn't smoke weed with 2CB, it can really kick it up." With that, I exhaled and panicked a little bit. Almost immediately I felt the effects of the pot. Previous to smoking the pot, I had vibrant colours, a small number of tracers, and everything was extremely high definition. I was sitting happily joking around with my friends. Almost immediately the mood changed. I started to become overwhelmed with the visuals. They went from light, bright colours to metallic, dark colours. I felt confused and nervous. It seemed like everything was too much to take in. It began to feel like the world was upside down. I tried my best to shrug it off and have a good time. I decided to try dancing a little while sitting down, but it wasn't as comforting and fun as I had expected it to be. While I was sitting in the circle on the ground with my friends, a guy in a Pink Panther suit with a red glowing box asked me if I wanted to touch it. I said yes and proceeded to do so. A few minutes later I started tripping harder. All of the images around me started to become dark. I realized that I was no longer where I was supposed to be or had been. I was somewhere eerily familiar and was taken there in a strange way. The best way that I can describe it is windshield wipers. It was like one wiper came from the left-hand side and wiped a completely new setting in front of me. I was still in a circle with Seaman, Jay, Leah, and Esmeralda, but everything else was different. The background of where we were was red and black, as though we were in a cave lit up by red lights and fire. I was in hell. I was sitting cross-legged and I was unable to move. I could turn my head, but my legs and arms were completely immobile. Seaman was leaning on my shoulder and he couldn't move either. My face was blank and I was confused. Esmeralda looked at me and said, "Do we finally look familiar?" "Yes." "Do you know from where?" "No." Now at this point, I don't remember if Esmeralda explained to me where I had known them from before, or if I just interpreted it and figured it out on my own. I had originally seen this scene on a salvia trip I had gone on. It was these 4 people and me in a room, stuck there for eternity. "Do you remember the warning?" "Oh fuck no, please." "Sorry honey, that's the way it is. You were told what was going to happen. Congratulations, you've officially tripped." Now, when she told me that I officially tripped, I thought 2 things. The first was that I had tripped and was going to be this high forever. The other thing I thought was that I had taken a bad pill and died. So I got into this weird loop where Jay, Leah and Esmeralda looked my way sadly, and I turned towards Seaman and he said, "I love you, Kiki." "I love you too, Seaman." This loop went on for about 10 minutes, just basically re-realizing what happened to me and looking toward my friends for some support. After 10 minutes of this, I kind of snapped myself out of it, had a couple of sips of water and started to rock my body back and forth since I couldn't move anything else. It seemed like I was beginning to snap out of my panicked mood and was going to have a nice, happy trip after all. God, was I ever wrong. As I did my rocking dance, I looked over at Seaman, who was looking up to me and smiling. I felt better, I felt lighter, and I could move. So I switched positions and stretched out my legs. I could talk again too. I explained to my friends what was going on in my conversations, where they said the only thing that was actually said was the "I love yous" between Seaman and I. Whatever, at least things were getting better. I guess, while I was in my state, a couple of people in the crowd had asked about me and how I was doing. Suddenly, there was a girl crouched down beside me. "What's she on?" she asked. Seaman answered her, "2CB." Seaman was attached to my arm again. I felt panicked. He went to nibble on my shoulder. It made my shoulder hurt. He had bitten my shoulder and ripped off a big chunk of flesh. I looked over at the girl who was someone I had never met. When my eyes reached her face, I was extremely terrified. She had red, evil eyes and blood pouring down her face. I looked toward my crew. They too had blood pouring down their face. I looked down at Seaman, whom I knew the best out of the group. He had devil horns, but I could still differentiate the fact that he was my friend. He wasn't evil, and that he looked that way because I was on drugs. In a panicked voice, I told Seaman to sit up so that he wasn't leaning against me, and he did so. I looked at him, weaved my fingers between his and held his hand as tight as I could. "It's bad," I said. "We have to go." Hand in hand, we began walking with the other 3 behind us. I needed to be away from the big crowd. As we walked, everyone that came toward us had blood pouring down their face. I looked up at Seaman, who was originally wearing a blue onesie which was now a black and white pinstripe suit with a red tie, devil horns and blood on his face. Esmeralda was now wearing a bright red dress, had fangs, a witch nose, and blood also pouring down her face. I hugged Seaman closer. He asked if I was okay. I couldn't speak. I shook my head. After breathing and attempting to understand my thoughts, I explained to Seaman what I was seeing and what was going on, how terrified I was. He told me to just hold his hand tight and close my eyes. He would be my guide. We walked for about 10 minutes where we stopped at some porta potties to pee. Seaman said that he needed to use the washroom. I really didn't want him to, but still proceeded to let go of his hand and let him take care of business. At this time, I got freaked out by something, grabbed Leah's hand, and took off. That's what happened in real life. In my head, it was much, much different. The girl who crouched down beside me came up to me and took me by the hand as a guide and started explaining things to me. Do you understand what you did? You know that your friends don't even notice that you're gone. She waved her hand across the scene as if to show me everything. This happens all the time. You just wanted to have fun, and now look at you. You're just another dead girl at a party. And where are your friends? They're not even with you. They don't even notice that you're gone. Are those really the people that you want to be calling your friends? I contemplated what she was saying. I was dead. That was where I had been when I was sitting down in the circle. My own personal hell, unable to move and just sitting there. The crouching girl took me on a tour and finally led me over to somewhere. It was the gates to hell. You don't have long. Make sure you're prepared. You know what you have to do. I gulped back my fears and tried my best to throw caution to the wind. Seaman came up to me and grabbed my hand. Kiki, is it starting to look familiar? Yes, I replied, and I'm fucking ready. But if I'ma do this, I'm not going to be afraid. I'm gonna do it like a fucking gangster. I'm gonna enjoy this. I want to be reminded how much it hurts. With that, I walked away doing a gangster strut. I walked up to my path to hell. On my path was everyone I had ever done wrong, anyone I had had a falling out with. Basically anyone whom I'd been in a negative situation with. They were all standing in a row beside where I needed to walk. I didn't look at them. I raised my head high and strutted past them. As I did so, they spat on me. The sky was dark. I was alone, but I felt strong and fearless. The path I was walking was made of a flesh-like substance. It was almost as though every time my foot was pressed against the ground, my foot was grafted to the ground, so each step that I took ripped the flesh off the bottom of my foot. It was extremely painful, to say the least, but I kept going. At the end of the path, there was a staircase, but Seaman, Jay, Esmeralda and Leah were part of the staircase, and we had to be broken down and painfully ripped apart. How this part looked is too hard to explain. I still don't fully understand what everything was in this scene or how it worked together. However, not long after I saw what I was in the end, I was taken back to where my drug-induced death had happened and looked down on myself. I had to look down on my body and watch myself deteriorate. Everything looked and smelled like rotting flesh. I watched this happen until all that was left of me was a chunk of my tongue rotting. And that flesh is what I was to be for eternity. That Chinese torture thing, where they drip water on your forehead until there is a hole in your skull. That's what was going to happen to my tongue. Once that was done, I was with Seaman again, and we were walking. He asked me if things were starting to look familiar again. The trip was about to go on repeat. At this point in real life, we headed to a tent and passed out. I sat up for a bit, tripping out on a picture. Confused and not quite sure if I was dead or alive. Eventually I passed out, and the effects mostly wore off. My 2CB trip lasted for 9 hell-raising hours. The pain that my feet had gotten from walking my path to hell was still affecting me for the whole next day. But 8 hours after feeling sober and having no visual effects, I smoked a joint. Immediately, maybe 5 minutes later, everything looked like it was rotting again. I was back in a bad place. I had to hide out in a tent. My 2CB trip really messed with me. I have done acid and mushrooms once each since this trip, and on both substances, I had flashbacks to hell. Even within the first few weeks when smoking pot, I was highly affected. Flashbacks, weird noises, and feelings of anxiousness. I truly enjoyed 2CB at the beginning of the trip, and I would love to do it again in a smaller dose, and definitely not smoke weed with it. Everyone that I have talked to said that they have never heard of a trip like this. It was scarring and something that I can't understand or comprehend, and a big eye-opener. Just because you go on a trip with a positive attitude does not mean that you'll have a good trip, and a bad trip is much harder to get out of than I ever imagined.